Did you get it?
How do you get
Okay.
the...
Try. Give you help on that.
Yep, found it.
Sorry.
There we go.
You get it?
Hey everybody, how y'all doing today? Evidently my bio didn't get through the chain of the internet, so my name's David Hughes. I'm with PCCW Global. I'm the Vice President of IP Engineering. And we've been working on SDN and NFV for quite a while now, a couple of years. And when they asked me to do this presentation, I did kind of a survey, and I realized that the technical aspects of NFV and SDN are kind of getting beat to death. There's a million presentations, and they've all been excellent presentations. And I didn't really think there was anything I could add over and above that, except maybe to talk about the beginnings. Because what we've learned is the way you start is directly related to the amount of success that you have in a project, okay? And one of the first problems is knowing you even need to get started, because sometimes getting started is the hardest part. And so we saw a trend coming, and one of the things we noticed was like this Gartner survey that came out and said basically by 2015, 40% or more of enterprise work will be non-routine. Well, back when we started, their non-routine work was probably zero, but my non-routine work as a provider was probably 50%. So if theirs is going up to 50%, mine's going up to 100. So how do I accommodate and deal with this non-routine work, you know? Now, a lot of people, you know, even within my own organization, I'm sure within yours, are kind of taking a wait-and-see approach to SDN and NFV, and that's fine. You know, they want to prefer to work on the short-term issues because they got numbers to hit now. They got things they want to get done now. But the trend is being felt now, and we really can see it coming. So, you know, if it gets ignored too long, it could really lead you to a bad place. So the key message there is, now is not the time to be putting your head in the sand, right? Now is the time to start thinking about change. If you think about it like a sports season, we're kind of in the, you know, the preseason, right? We're in the contemplation stage. And we're getting ready, we're getting ourselves psyched up. So, you know, we need to think about how we get started, and that kind of dictates the level of success we'll have relative to our efforts with SDN and NFV. And so I think we're kind of in a networking midlife crisis now. You know, we're starting to sort of see maybe our end of life. What we've done for the last 40 years was fine, but now we're getting older. Things are getting harder to do. We're having a little bit tougher time kind of adapting to changing environments, changing circumstances. So, you know, and some people are thinking, well, maybe the SDN is sort of like that fancy sports car you go out and buy when you hit your midlife crisis, right? But, you know, it's probably not the case, because we're seeing a lot of real trends. It's hard to get power in a data center, so you can't put more big iron out there. Staffing's tough. Hardware costs are going up. Space is rare to find. Sometimes you got to spread your routers all over the place just to get them to work. Provisioning is a terrible mess sometimes. And it's because we have this mounting technical debt within our networks, right? And what technical debt is sometimes you get this deadline that's not realistic, so you do whatever it takes to get it done. But later, you got to deal with that. You got to pay that debt off. Otherwise, you know, you get to a point where you can't really do anything. So it makes it really hard to add services and make changes, and so you start failing in other areas. And then your management loses, you know, confidence in you, and then what do you do, right? So what happens is we have this huge patchwork that we're asked on a daily basis to make into a quilt. And you know, me personally and my engineers, we don't even know how to sew, right? So how do we do this? Because you get these odd problems that come up and they're like, I don't know, how do we do this again, right? So all I can say, you know, maybe SDN, maybe NFV, maybe now, maybe later, but what I can say is what used to work doesn't work anymore, right? And the future is not what it used to be. We've gone through kind of a revolution, right? So the next logical question is, how do we change with it? How do we not get left behind? You know, there's a redefinition going on, and we have to decide at all levels, as individuals, as groups, as teams, as organizations, as companies, how we're going to respond to this. Now, I thought it was very interesting that an Intel guy was up here earlier, because if you look at Andy Grove and the history of Intel, Andy Grove took his company, which was #1 memory chip manufacturer in the world. And he went when it was very successful and said, I'm going to redefine my entire company, and we're going to start making microprocessors. And he did that successfully, and he was able to hit the curve ahead of time and convert his company to be #1 microprocessor company, right? And he did that. He refers to this thing called point of inflection, all right? And what a point of inflection is it's an entering of circumstances to bring us to vision and change. And I'm making the assertion that we're in an inflection point now, right? And the irony of inflection points is nothing much happens for a while. So people that may have doubts about SDN and NFV and the validity of it, they're not seeing any real drivers because we're in that irony point where there's not a lot of happening. You know, we're in that contemplation state. But eventually, there's going to be a point of recognition where you realize, yeah, we should have changed. But then it's even harder to change. So if at the inflection point, you start moving forward with intent to the new paradigm, you accept the change, you start adjusting your methods, then you're much better positioned to meet the needs of the customers, and that's what we're all here for ultimately, is to serve customers, right? And if you reject that change and maintain the status quo, over time, your relevance starts to dip down. Now, a few years ago, I read a book by Bob Hayes, and he said basically, we used to compete on price. Today we compete on quality. Soon we will compete on design. And for the most part, that's pretty true, right? I mean, you look at iPhones and Samsung, and everything is now competing on design. Who has a unique design? Maybe not even the best, just who has the best design for me, more unique. So if we're going to start competing on design, we have to clean all this legacy, all this technical debt out of our system so we can enable better design. We can enable the benefits offered by service chaining, NFV, plugging in, innovating at software speeds, not hardware speeds. But the problem is that means we got to change, and change is hard. I read in another book that after open heart surgery, 3 years later, only 1 in 9 people had changed their lifestyles. Oddly enough, the author pointed out that the same is true in the corporate world. After bankruptcy, only about 1 in 9 companies actually ever changed what they're doing. So the reason why that change is hard is because to really change, you have to understand something subjectively. It's not enough just to understand it objectively. I know I need to exercise. I know I need to eat well, right? I know I need to separate data plane, control plane. I know I need to virtualize my network functions. But if I only understand that objectively, and I don't really understand it subjectively, I'm not going to change. I'm going to take SDN and NFV and repeat the same mistakes I did previously, and I'm going to kind of end up in the same place. As Einstein said, any fool can know, the point is to understand, right? And so what my talk is really more of a talk of the first thing you really need to do is gain this subjective understanding of what NFV and SDN is. More importantly, gain a subjective understanding of who you are and what you're wanting to do. And then you can take all these different vendor approaches, different strategies, different techniques, and you can make sense out of it because you can apply it to your understanding and your vision of the world, right? And you can avoid that technical debt. So, because if you don't do that eventually, and if you go with vendors A approach right off the bat or something right off the bat, and you don't have a vision established, eventually what you didn't know, it will find you, and that's where the sidewalk ends, right? And you're right back where you are, looking out into the wilderness, thinking, now what do I do? I'm no better off today than I was before. So the first thing to gain a subjective understanding of SDN and NFV is to realize that it's primarily an organizing concept, right? You need to understand the why before the how. Yeah, it's separating data plane, control plane, but why? Why is that relevant, right? Because it's all based on modularity. If you ever use Java or know of Java, maybe you've heard of Barbara Liskov, all right? She's invented basically object-oriented concepts. And what she said is that modularity based on abstractions is how things get done, period. That's the only way to do it. It's true for software and it's true for us, right? So we have to have things that are modular and we have to have abstractions. So if you look at the data plane, it's a wonderful set of modularity, wonderful set of abstractions. That hourglass really actually works, You have layer upon layer upon layer upon layer, and you don't have to know anything about the bottom layer to do something on the web, right? I can write PHP code without knowing anything about copper or fiber. It works. So you have easy-to-use modularity with very clean abstractions. All right, now the problem is the control plane doesn't really fit that model. There is no modularity. There is no abstractions, right? It's all a big ball of mud. So you basically just have a bunch of mechanisms that don't really interrelate. And that's why SDN says not really, you're separating the data plane from the control plane, you're putting abstractions onto the control plane finally. So now you can build things easier in a modular way, and you make networking normal, you know. So SDN's goal isn't to eliminate complexity, it's basically to put it where it belongs by providing proper abstractions. And, you know, in some sense, the network will become a big distributed software system. So it would behoove you to familiarize yourself with some of these concepts in distributed software, right? So if you look at your ball of mud, you have, you know, configuration just does everything. It has to understand ASICs, it's got to know how to put that in, it's got to do it to everything all at once, otherwise you have long convergent times, you have loops, you get into big problems. And so what we do with SDN is you come up with this controller, which, you know, really is basically 3 layers. You have the network OS, which still has that complexity. It still understands big iron routers and all the interconnections and all the confusion that goes on there, but it's going to abstract that for you. And there's going to be a network virtualization layer that sits on top of that makes it just a clean, simple pattern, right? And then on top of that is your controller, your orchestration components, and they have a nice, easy view. So you can have a developer build systems without really having to understand networking, so to speak. So that lets you be, you know, you can become more edge focused. You can do things like transactional updates across your network environment. You can do more frequent releases, you know. So how does all that help you as far as getting started on your efforts with SDN? Well, again, to reiterate, you know, the problem with comprehension is it often comes too late. So if you start that first SDN project off and you don't really understand your vision, your goal, you might end up in a redo situation, which causes budget overruns, causes it to lag, causes management to lose confidence in SDN. So you don't want to do that. So the very first thing you can do, which AT&T did, which I thought was tremendous, is they came out with a vision. And they were clear to state it's not an architecture, it's a vision, right? And if you get kind of too caught up in architecture and design day one, you're kind of missing the point, right? The first thing is to establish a vision of what you want to do for your company, for your network. What problems are you trying to solve? What is your vision? And live in that vision, not in circumstances, which is hard to do, you know. But at the end of it, you got to remember to keep the main thing, and that's providing services customers want when they want them, and that's hard. So the things that we did that we realized when we started off is it's best to keep it simple to begin with because we're not going to understand the full set of requirements, right? And there's not enough time to do everything, so compartmentalize and prioritize your work. Focus on the easy stuff, the low-hanging fruit, and build on that, right? And then when you go to evaluate vendor solutions, take a look at their abstractions. Try to drill down and understand how they abstract things, and does it match up to your view, to your abstractions? Because if they don't, if there's a disjoint, you're going to have problems later, right? And just because the system has APIs doesn't mean it's open. APIs are a new way to lock you in, right? So carefully look at their APIs, and do they have a history of providing APIs? Do they know how to do APIs right? You know, look at their solution for high availability. You know, do they have a virtualized product? You know, all these different things, which, you know, other presentations have probably beat down on this, and the NFV4, Etsy has some nice documentation, which goes over that much better than I do, right? But the other thing to understand about SDN is it's not a one-size-fits-all. Everybody talks about SDN like it's just one thing, right? So I threw this graphic together. It's probably not very accurate. It took me about 10 minutes, but it just tried to highlight the issue that is, as bandwidth moves from a constrained to an unconstrained place, and as geography goes from constrained to an unconstrained geography, your abstractions are a little different. You still may have the same base class, the same abstraction, but how you instantiate that abstraction to something concrete may be a little different. I worked at Intelsat for 10 years. And, you know, we use satellites. There were probably 5 different ways people thought of satellites, and none of them matched up. They were all completely different. And it's the same here with, you know, what might work in a data center might not work in the core. So you have to have some flexibility. And there's so many different ways, you know, of doing this with data center fabric and SDN models that, you know, none of them are bad. You know, bad is relative. Does it work for you? Does it doesn't work for you? And you can't determine what's good or bad until you understand your goals, you know. And as you're working through this, you know, you've got to pay attention to service chaining, and do not forget netconf and Yang. You know, sometimes that's like a low entryway to orchestration, right? Because there's a lot of good netconf products out there. So you don't necessarily have to take that big leap into a big orchestrated controller. Maybe start off with just some simple netconf and some Yang tools. So what we've done with NFV is, these are some just a random list of things that people typically start off with NFV. The bold ones are probably a little bit easier to approach, and we've worked on many of these things. But, as you think about doing virtualization and moving to NFV, the key thing is use common sense. Just because you can doesn't mean you should, right? Some things are worth virtualizing, some things aren't. So always pay attention to that, and if that little voice inside of your head is not making happy noises, listen to that thing. Pay attention to the little voice inside your head. It'll save you a lot of pain. All right, now, technology is good and wonderful, but that's probably not the most critical thing to success. The most critical thing to success is all the other noise we have to deal with in organizations, right? Auditing and auditors. Things are happening in an automated way. If you're used to having, signed documents in triplicate to gate each step of a process, or to gate a cell, your auditors are going to have a fit. They're not going to understand what's going on. So you may want to try to get ahead of that issue a little bit, right? Disaster recovery takes on a whole different meaning. Yes, disaster recovery was important before. Now it's like an order of magnitude more important. Your controller goes down, your network's down. So pay very careful attention to how you're going to do DR and think about that day one. All right, big data, analytics. A lot of people don't deal with big data. It's kind of, the realm of the CDNs and the cloud guys. But as your network starts depending more upon automation, you're going to depend more on analytics. So when you do start looking at SDN controllers, pay attention. Do they support analytics? Do they support modeling? Do they support simulation? Because these are critical things you're going to need to automate changes on your network. You've got to know where the problems are and predict them. Security. I don't really know of any company that's suffered long-term adverse impacts because of a security breach. Maybe Target might be the first one to ever do it, right? But typically security, you have a break-in, you deal, you go, and you recover, and then you're better, right? It's a little bit different now, because if you have a security breach on your controller, you're done. Your network's down, and you may be the first company to never recover from a security breach. Don't want that to happen. The last and most important thing is policies and procedures. Your company will have policies and procedures, and you will have to comply with them. And this is one of the ones that we've kind of run into that's the hardest to deal with. Because SDN and NFV touches so many parts of the organization, from IT to engineering to even legal and everybody else, that if you aren't following those policies and procedures, any one of those groups can kind of block your effort. So make sure you really have a handle on your policies and procedures as you go through and that you comply with those. It makes your life much easier. So this next graphic is sort of looking at how we're changing, right? How things are evolving. Before, we would build systems to last. You'd build it once, put it out there, 20 years later, you're still using it, right? That's not the case anymore. Now you're building things purposefully to change because we have to be reactive to customers' desires, and they're doing whatever, and it's hard to keep up with them because they outpace us. There's way more of them than there are of us, right? So you have to make sure you build your systems to change. That means you got to incrementally build and deploy, and people aren't used to that. People like that waterfall lifecycle model. We get a big, huge requirements document, everybody approves it in triplicate, we go away for 6 months, we put something down, everybody signs off on it, you go to unit testing, and a year later you're rolling your system out. Well, that's not going to work anymore. You have to be able to work incrementally, all right? So the object is to innovate at software speed. Right? Hardware takes too long. We want to do things at software speed. How quick can I build an app, test, deploy, and roll it out? What groups do that really well? Agile. If you don't know about agile development, it'd probably behoove you to go and investigate agile development. There's a very nice website. I think it's, if you Google Agile, a gentle introduction, it's a very good site to read. The other critical thing is DevOps model. I don't know how many people in here are familiar with DevOps, but that is going to become a critical factor of SDN and NFV, is you've got to understand the DevOps model and you've got to start migrating to it. Fortunately, because we're doing things in software now, a lot of DevOps concepts with automated unit testing are enabled by SDN and NFV. So, but your operations people have to buy into it because it's a non-standard way of doing things, right? The other thing I'd always point out is you're still going to incur technical debt. You're going to do things wrong. You're going to fail, right? But look at all the people who failed before and then went on to succeed, right? I think there's a Michael Jordan commercial, and he said, basically, because I fail, I succeed. So don't be afraid to try things, but also don't be afraid to go back and improve things. And so the goal would be maybe 20% of all your project effort is going back and cleaning up technical debt so it never builds to too high of a level. All right. The last and most important thing is your people. They're going to be the ones that let you succeed or fail. And when you first go to your network engineers and say, hey, we're going to do this SDN, their first reaction is, oh my God, he's going to replace me with a shell script. But that's not the point. The point is that what's going on, and you see it in the aviation industry, you see it in the medical industry, you see it in a lot of places, is the day where a person can act unilaterally and make all decisions is done. Everything now is going to be a partnership between a human and an algorithm interaction. There's going to be a feedback loop there. And the algorithms make us smarter, and we make the algorithms better. And that's sort of what this is all about, is enabling people to work better so that they have a better quality of life. They're not frustrated by middle-of-the-night phone calls because they don't know how to fix anything because it's all broken. So your people are your best asset. They're your best technology, and they're what's going to determine your success or failure as you move through this project. So take care of them and train them and keep them in the loop. So, in summing up, basically, getting started on anything is the hardest part. Getting started right is even harder. And to get started right, first thing you need to do is sit down and establish a vision. And if you don't do that, all your efforts after that are going to step on each other. And with that, I just wish you all the best of luck. I hope you enjoy your time in Paris, and thank you very much for your time.
Thanks. Julie, only one, please. She's coming there. Can you?
Hi, Dave. Rajiv. First of all, I admire what you do for PCCW and what you do for industry. And I'll start with a comment. What a great presentation. And as the saying goes, the true greatness lies in simplicity. And this is a simple presentation with a very powerful message. And I think it confirms what I've been thinking since I arrived in Paris and I attended the same conference last year. And we are talking about SDN and NFV, which is every person who's coming on the podium, as you said, is talking about NFV to the roots and SDN use cases. So the more and more I think, I say that SDN can be defined as a self-defined network, and software is an enabler. So I want to ask your take on it. What do you think? Is it the right thinking that I have? It's really the self-defining networks or self-defined networks? Because really it's all about the operators, what they want to do, rather than listening to vendors, listening to industry, what SDN is. I want to do SDN, but we really do not know where it fits.
Yeah, actually, I really hate the term SDN in general. I just like thinking of it as networking, right? It's just kind of the natural evolution of where we're going beyond. We started off with MPLS, 12, 14 years ago, and now we don't even say MPLS, it's networking, right? So yes, in 10 years, we probably won't use the term SDN anymore, it'll just be networking. So, and it is self-defined, it is a service-defined network, it is all those things, but we just have to put labels on it to call it something so we can pitch it to management. So, but yeah, I definitely agree with your thinking, absolutely.
Thanks again.
Thank you all.
Slide is there. I don't know.
How do we do this?
I think it's supposed to be
Do we
there.
close this? Close this?
Go there and check.
This
Yeah,
one?
there. It's supposed to be there.
That one.
Yeah, it's there.
And how?
Yeah. Go ahead, Cole. We are short in time. We will go straight. All right. Thanks.
Oh, wait a minute.
Colin, Alexander, has held a number of design and marketing roles over the last 20 years. And he will present another approach, an ARM, also very successful approach for the NFV. Thanks. Go ahead.